Awesome. So I think we have a good enough audience. So let's just get started. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm just going to walk you over the logistics real quick. So this is our second installment of the Leading with Impact series, where we sit down with Jeff, who's already here with us on board, and talk about transitioning from feeling overwhelmed to feeling empowered. During this 1 hour session, we encourage you to participate and put any questions you might have at any point in the Q&A section, and we'll be using the upvote feature and walking over all the different questions towards the end. With that being said, let's kick it off with a brief introduction of who we are. So 180 Degrees Consulting is the world's largest university-based consultancy. We're based out of 140 plus universities in 35 countries. And predominantly what we do is we connect the university talent to the local nonprofits and social enterprises and connect the dots, bridge the gap, and provide strategic consultancy services. So that's enough about us. Let's talk about Litterati and Jeff. So Litterati is a global movement that's trying to crowdsource clean the planet one community at a time. It was started by Jeff back in 2012 from the Bay Area, and now it's expanded to over 160 countries, and have picked up collectively over 5 million pieces of litter. This is just a heat map they're seeing of all their global footprint, and the data they've been able to collect over the past years has been able to create a tangible impact in urban planning and city legislature. With that being said, it was founded by none other than Jeff, who's here with us today. Just a quick introduction. He's a 3X startup entrepreneur, TED resident, and he's featured by a variety of magazines and newspapers, including but not limited to National Geographic, Rolling Stone, Forbes, and Time magazine. He's an undergrad from University of Michigan, and I'll let him introduce himself for a quick minute. So Jeff, the floor is yours.
Raj, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm the founder and CEO of Litterati, and as Raj said, we are on a mission to eradicate litter and identify the world's waste. And we're doing that by empowering people to really be part of a solution for what is clearly a global problem and one that affects us universally. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here, Jeff. So let's just get started right with the questions then. This global movement sounds beautiful, but then there must be a point where you just barely got started. So we wanted to start there from the beginning of your journey and talk about how did you even think of this idea, and sort of what was the first step you took in this process to get started?
I was hiking in the woods with my two little kids who were 4 and 2 at the time. And my daughter noticed this plastic tub of cat litter lying in a creek. And she looked at me and said, "Daddy, that doesn't go over." Like this really innocent comment. But for me, it was an eye-opening moment. When she said that, it reminded me of when I was a kid. So I used to go to summer camp, and on the morning of visiting day, the camp director would say, "Quick, everybody go pick up 5 pieces of trash." And so you'd get a couple hundred kids, each picking up a few pieces. And within a few minutes, we had a spotless camp. And so I thought, why not apply that crowdsourced model to the planet? And that was really the inspiration for starting Litterati.
Gotcha. And then when you had that thought, right, what's the first step that you took? How did you get started, and what did the first 6 months look like?
Yeah, so what happened next was frankly weird. I took a photograph of a cigarette butt using Instagram, and I would love to tell you that I had an idea at the time, but I didn't. I just took this photograph of a cigarette butt, and then I took another photograph and another photograph and another, and I noticed 2 things happening to me. The first was simply because of the power of Instagram, litter and trash became artistic, right? The bottle cap that was lying on the ground suddenly became a photo opportunity. And because it was artistic, it became approachable. So the thing that I either never noticed or didn't want anything to do with was really sort of attractive suddenly. The second thing I noticed was that at the end of a week, I had 50 or 60 photos on my phone, and I had picked up and properly discarded every single piece that I photographed. And so I realized that the same way people are measuring the steps they walk or the miles they ride or the calories they consume, I was measuring the positive impact I was having on the planet. And that just felt really good. Still no idea of what I could do with that. But I just started telling people what I was doing. And to make a long story just a little bit longer, what started out as this Instagram hashtag, if you will, has now turned into quite a larger community around the world.
Definitely. And we'll transition into, how you went from Instagram to an app in just a little bit. But before that, when you were trying to share your story to, people around you, to your local community, and probably like a broader audience, how did you come about hiring your first ever recruit? Like, what was that first person that joined the movement with you?
Yeah, so key word there, hire. I didn't hire anybody because I had nothing to hire them with.
Mm-hmm.
It was really a case of, could I figure out a way to tell a story that was compelling and to get people attractive to the same thing that I was attracted to? And so once I started going through this process of, okay, I'm using Instagram to clean the planet, that became a fairly provocative statement, because people would say, well, what do you mean you're using Instagram to clean the planet? Whether it was, a family member or press or somebody that I was just trying to convince to join me and what I was doing. And so the very first person was an old colleague that I was working with. And I just showed him like, hey, what do you think about this? Like, look at how the artistic nature of it. And then we figured out that there was actually, and this was sort of a light bulb moment, that there was quite a bit of data with each photograph on Instagram. So we knew that there was geotags, and we knew that there were timestamps. And so the next thing I did was I convinced this person who convinced another person to build a map. I can't write a line of code. In fact, I don't even really know what I'm looking at when I look at code. But what I was pretty convinced about was that if this problem upset me, it probably upset a lot of other people. And if we could chip away at it, one person, one piece at a time, that was the only way I knew how to start.
Gotcha. Makes sense. So then the person who reached out to another person who helped you with the mapping and the coding aspect of it, did you think about this geotagging and building like an AI model right away, or was that sort of a gradual process around the years?
Yeah, I think a running theme throughout either my career and or Litterati has been, I often have no idea what I'm doing. I just have a sense of where I want things to go, and then try to figure out how to bring together the people that can make that vision a reality. So what happened was, suddenly there were effectively three of us, everybody with other jobs. But slowly but surely, we all of a sudden put together a website and we had a map. And all we were doing was bringing in the Instagram photographs, map data, and plotting the points of pretty much where I was picking up litter. It was just me. Those two individuals were picking up a piece here, a piece there. But for the most part, it was, every day I would add 10 more pieces. That was really when we started to understand, like, okay, there's something here. And the reason we understood that was, if you know on Instagram, you can touch a hashtag and it'll show you all the other photos that share that same hashtag. Well, nobody knew this word Litterati, but suddenly over time I would touch the tag and I would start seeing photos that weren't mine, and they were placed in places like China. And that was when, this other light bulb went off, which was, wow, this is starting to spread. I don't exactly know how, but it is. And that was really a fascinating moment for us, because at that point we realized that Litterati was more than just a bunch of pretty pictures. We were becoming a community, and the community was collecting quite a bit of data.
Definitely. So then, is Litterati something you thought about as a word for your vision and your organization right from the get-go, or how did that word come up in your mind? Or was that like a brainstorming process that went in?
Yeah, not at all. So what happened next was so remember, it's completely on Instagram at this point. So we built a website, and it had 2 pages. It didn't even have 2 pages. It basically had a hello and a map. The next thing we did was we thought, all right, well, Instagram is making these beautiful photographs. So we built something that we called the digital landfill. And all we did was pull any Litterati hashtag photo into the website and display it in the photo gallery, right? And so that was really unique, because all of a sudden we had something to show other people. And the next thing that happened was we started thinking like, well, what else could we show? What else could we do? And at the time I was teaching a class on storytelling. And I started sharing with my students, hey, this is what, this idea is. And I didn't really have a name, but I had really bad ideas for potential names, like Planet Clean, Trash 101. I mean, it was terrible. One of my students said, well, you've got photos and litter. What about Litterati? Sort of playing on the paparazzi idea.
Right.
And a second student just said, what about Litterati? And that was it. Never looked back.
Wow. That's beautiful. That's something that everybody has a lot of difficulty with, is they want to start a movement, they want to start an organization, but what do I name it that's not too generic or too boring or just too funny to the point that no one takes them seriously, right? And to strike that balance, like me personally, I've just Googled Latin words half the time, trying to think about, including some of those tail end of those words, or probably like a prefix or a suffix. So that's really interesting. So teach a class on storytelling and have your students pitch.
It's interesting because I started my career in advertising and I spent a lot of time brainstorming for other companies' names. And there are so many methods you can use to try to come up with brand identity. And there's a lot of thought that goes into, what's a word that's going to resonate? What is a word that is clear? What is, do I start it with an uppercase letter or a lowercase letter? This was just sort of clear the moment the person said it. And I figured I don't need to waste any more time. That works. And it has ever since.
That makes sense. So we're talking a lot about the app, a lot about its impact, and a lot about how we came to develop some of these features. How about we dive straight into the app, and maybe you can talk about the transition from Instagram to the app while I pull it up on this view.
Sure. So this was one of the, I would say, more difficult or interesting challenges that we faced early on. So I had been telling people we're using Instagram to clean the planet. And, when anybody would ask how, it was very simple. Photograph a piece of litter using Instagram. Step 2, add the hashtag Litterati. Step 3, throw out or recycle whatever you find. Like, really clear. But we realized once this started growing that if we ever wanted to create a user experience that was more in alignment with our mission, we would have to probably develop our own app. I had no idea how to do that, and I certainly didn't have the resources to do that, but we took a leap, and I'm really glad that we did. And so we built iOS first, and this was another indication of you just sort of ask the world for help. And so again, I had a friend who had a friend who was taking an iOS development course. And he was looking for a project to build and I was looking for an app to build, and we just said, okay, this works. And 8 weeks later, we had our first version of the iOS application. So what you're seeing here is after a home screen, we come into really this community page. And for us, we'll talk about why community is so important, but this idea that when you're battling, a global environmental problem, it really helps to know that there are other people battling it with you. But the way Litterati works is it's a photo app. So you would snap the photo button down in the lower right corner, and you would photograph a Starbucks cup or a cigarette butt or a bottle cap or anything you want. These are just some tool tips that come on. And once you photograph that item, it immediately goes into a gallery. So I'll show you the gallery in a second, but effectively it's exactly what it sounds like. What I'll show you there is something we've developed recently around AI and machine learning. The other thing that you'll see here are not only data of how the community has performed month over month, meaning the total number of pieces that the community has picked up, but something called challenges. So challenges are simply a container for any group of people to come together and work towards a goal. So it might be, let's pick up 5,000 pieces within a specific location over a specific time. So you can see challenges that are near you and you can see challenges that are featured. If you click, Raj, on View All, you'll see some of the current featured challenges.
There we go.
And you see, click on featured and you should find them. I don't know how your internet connection is. I'll show you another place how to get there if it's for whatever reason not coming up. Go ahead and click out of it. Yep. So down here are challenges that I've started, right? So these are ones where I've actually created the challenge. You can then get a code. I can share it as wide as I want. This is one that I created in Vancouver. and set a goal of several thousand pieces. It was for something called the Ocean Heroes Boot Camp, which was 300 youth coming together from all over the world. And if you hit view, it'll take you into what are those challenge details and things like that. So location, how many participants, there's the code, etc. If you scroll back to the top, and also you can see top contributors, but we'll show you that now. So go out of the challenge and scroll over to activity. So activity is a rolling 24 hours. So right now you're looking at my profile. So I, in the last 24 hours, have actually not picked up a single piece, but below me, you'll see people around the world and exactly how many pieces they've picked up in the last 24 hours. And yes, it may seem hard to believe that people are picking up hundreds or even 1,000+ pieces a day. But what we have learned is that there are a lot of people around the world who really care about solving this problem. And they are committed to taking an action, photographing a piece of litter and picking it up for the greater good. And this is a list of the top 20. If you hit countries, you'll see the countries that have been the top 20 in the last 24 hours. The Dutch community is unbelievable. What they do on a day-to-day basis right now, and frankly, since the inception of Litterati, has blown us away. Later, I'll talk about something that just happened this week as a result of the data that the Dutch have collected that has kind of made us really open our eyes to what's possible. If you scroll all the way over to profile, all the way to, keep going, right there. So this gives you a sense of what you've done, or in this case, me. I've picked up 55,000 pieces. There's a map below that shows where I've picked it up. But if you scroll down, you'll come to the gallery. And if you click on gallery, you'll see the images that I've picked up. And if you click on any one of them, what we do is we have AI that comes into the photograph, and it looks to identify what is the object, what is the material, and what is the brand. So you can see right there, we are suggesting, right? The AI is suggesting that that is a plastic water bottle. Now, it's not yet recognizing that brand, and that's simply because our machine learning model has not been trained well enough on this particular brand. But that's exactly where we're going, and it's one of the things we're headed, one of the things we're working on now. You can imagine, Raj, that trying to identify every object, material, and brand around the world is an incredibly complex problem.
Definitely.
Especially when there are things in different states of decay and decomposition. So that's a quick overview of the application. And again, really simple. We like to say it's simple yet sophisticated. Simple that you snap a photo, sophisticated in that we are using AI to collect all this data at scale and work with a lot of our partners and just share the data with individuals around the world.
Definitely. So then that brings us to one of the natural questions, right? It will not have been 160+ countries right from the get-go for this app, right? There will be different features of this app that you build over time, and it was an iteration and you went from there. What was the inspiration behind putting community left, right, and center? Because that looks like a very, a specific choice, right? So trying to get an understanding of what made you put it in sort of this view, right? Versus just opening up with profile or something like that.
So that's a great point. There's this idea that we have, which is, it's one of the hypotheses, which is that, look, people have been cleaning up the planet for decades. There are coastal cleanups, neighborhood litter walks, right? But there's two missing components in our view. One is community and the other is data. So yes, there might be community coming together for an hour here to walk on a beach, but once they go back home, there's total disconnect. Therefore, there's this feeling of overwhelm. So there's litter everywhere. There's waste all over the place. And it can feel really overwhelming. Like, what difference would it make if I picked up that one bottle cap? It feels hopeless. Right. By making community front and center, it lets people know that, there are other people taking this same action for the greater good. So let me actually show you what's on my phone, and I can show you that feature challenge. So hopefully you can see this right here. Yep. So I'm on the same screen. I don't know why Raj's isn't loading, but here's mine. And you can see this particular group just launched the challenge, and they already have thousands of contributions happening. That for us is what inspires people to say, okay, there are others doing this. I'm joining in, right? When you're alone, it's really tough to battle these massive problems. But, 1, you're crazy. 2-year couple, 3-year community, suddenly that feeling of overwhelm turns into one of empowerment. And that's really why we make this front and center.
Right.
The other piece is the data.
Mm-hmm.
And the data is critical to changing policy, to inspiring smarter packaging, and to changing personal responsibility. We call them the 3 Ps: policy,
right.
packaging, personal responsibility. And so by putting this front and center, that's the feeling we try to invoke, to try to create overwhelm and transform it into one of empowerment and inspiration.
That makes sense. And on the other end of the spectrum, right, when you, let's say, are in the building phase of this movement, you don't have a lot of that inspiration because, let's say, you don't have a lot of the data, right, which is like the chicken and the egg problem. Have you ever had a moment where you just said, you know, all right, I'm done with it. You know, this is crazy. I don't think I can, you know, do this anymore. Nothing's going my way. Well, then you took a step back, you reevaluated, and you thought about it again, and you sort of persevered through it. Like, tell us about your thought process in those tough moments.
Those tough moments happen daily. Mm-hmm. And that's not an exaggeration. Just ask my wife or kids. Like, they happen every day. And I think that's why when you are starting something, it's so important to remember why you started. Mm-hmm. Right? Because the truth is, things get tough.
Right.
And it becomes an emotional roller coaster. And what for me seems to be centering is to constantly come back to, like, okay, I'm doing this because I believe in a greater good. I'm doing this because I want to leave the world better than I found it. To be totally frank, like, I'm not passionate about trash. That's not something that, like, internally is really interesting to me. Mm-hmm. What is really interesting to me is, how do I build something that can empower other people to be part of a solution that can help the entire world? That is what gets me up every day. And so when things, you know, go wrong, when obstacles come up that you never saw coming, it really helps to just remember why you started.
That makes sense. So then, talking about the passion and linking it to the policy component of it, right? What was that first moment when you thought about, we have all this data, let's pitch it to a local, city planning folks and the local city departments to sort of maybe create that impact through legislation? Like, what was those initial steps that you took?
So the technology is important and the data is important, but at the end of the day, it's about what change can you make. And so what happened that led to policy discussions was really something that came out of a classroom. So I had given a talk at the Monterey Bay Aquarium in California and had met a number of teachers. And I met one particular teacher who told me that his 5th grade class had used Litterati when it was just on Instagram.
Wow.
To pick up 1,247 pieces of litter just on their campus.
That's beautiful.
But they looked at the data and they saw that the majority of the litter were the plastic straw wrappers from their own cafeteria. Mm-hmm. And so these students went to their principal and just asked, why are we even buying straws? And they stopped. And that was, for me, another light bulb moment, because it showed me the power of the data. Mm-hmm. It led to change. That then led to a conversation with the city of San Francisco. So the city of San Francisco wanted to understand what percentage of litter came from cigarettes. And the reason they wanted that data was they wanted to create a tax on all cigarette sales. Mm-hmm. So years before Litterati existed, they had armed people with pencils and clipboards who walked around the city and came up with that information, literally by going, that's a cigarette, that's not, that is, that's not. And it created a 20-cent tax on all cigarette sales. And then the city got sued by the tobacco industry, who claimed that pencils and clipboards weren't precise and not provable. So we started talking to the city, and we were brought in, and our data was used to not only defend, but double the tax, which generates approximately $4 million a year in annual recurring revenue for the city of San Francisco. And that was the moment that I realized that this data, when collected in a way that was statistically significant and scientifically rigorous, could actually create real meaningful change at scale. The funny part of that story is that all of that data was collected literally between me, a few other people, using an Instagram account. we didn't have a technology at that point. We
Right.
had no real analytics, but what we had was evidence-backed data, evidence in the form of a photograph, right? The simplicity of a photograph that can tell you who picked up what, where, and when. And it really was a major eye-opener, I think, not just for us, but for others, about how data, when collected, can really change a system.
That makes sense. This naturally leads us to one question, right? Clearly there's passion. Clearly there's data supporting something that affects not just your local community, but also the global one. And then clearly there are a lot of people who are joining the movement to make it all happen in the triangle, right? But for a lot of our, maybe student founders or leaders sitting across the planet right now, they want to start something, but they don't want to lose their day job, maybe because they can't pay rent if they just quit their day job one day and then start building something like this or building their idea the next day, right? How do you take your idea that is going to benefit the environment or something of a social cause and turn it into something that can also help you pay your rent?
I don't think there's a magic bullet. I don't think there's one answer, and I think it's really, really hard. At some point, I think you need to figure out, is there a business? That's taken us a long, long time. And I think if you asked anybody on the Litterati team, we would all say, like, it's a sacrifice, right? And that's why coming back to your why is so critical, because this is one of the hard things, right? At what point do you leave the safety and security of a day job to pursue something that you believe can drive impact?
Right.
There's one school of thought which says, keep working your typical day job, and at nights and weekends and whenever you can find 15 minutes here and there, keep working on your project.
Right.
Until you get to a point where you have enough either external validation or internal belief to jump off the cliff. Mm-hmm. Regardless, it's going to take courage, because I would say that even if you have some external validation, maybe that external validation is fleeting. Maybe some people believed in it at first and were willing to either write an investment check, or a commercial partner came and it made sense, and then 6 months later, it doesn't make sense. Like, it's an ongoing learning process, or as we call a customer discovery process. So at some point, though, you got to make the jump. If you're talking to investors, I think it's pretty hard to raise capital from anybody if you're not in it full time. And I recognize that is a really, really difficult challenge for people. But, there's the whole, where there's a will, there's a way. There are ways to figure out how to get enough capital through fellowships, through grants, to support yourself, at least maybe for 6 months or a year, so you can dive in head first and immerse yourself in this process. Mm-hmm. There's another school of thought which just says, go right from the beginning. Right. That's a lot scarier, right? Mm-hmm. You got to find what works for you, and it's probably somewhere in the middle.
Definitely. That makes sense. And then throughout that process, anyone will face a whole variety of challenges. I'm sure you've faced your own set of challenges and key decisions and big decisions that you've made. As a founder, right, you might have vision that says X. And then when you bring along a team of people, they might have a vision or sort of an initiative that says Y. How do you go about the process of sort of reconciling the two, and then bringing together people for a common vision or a common, let's say, initiative for the next 2 to 3 months, right? Especially when there's a difference in your vision versus your team's.
Well, ideally, the vision is consistent, right? So that North Star, the why, ideally, everybody's on board with, like, why are you doing what you're doing? What is your mission? So I would say that if, somebody on the team does not see this vision of identifying the world's waste and eradicating litter, it's probably not the right situation for them. So that part is hopefully consistent. But it's maybe several degrees lower, where a vision of how a product should look and feel, about a particular feature, about how communication goes out, those are where there can be interesting areas of tension. And to me, tension is good, because if everybody, like, what you don't want to surround yourself with is a bunch of yes people.
Yes,
right? If everybody's just saying, well, yes, absolutely, yes, that, you're not going to improve. You're not going to push yourself to find the ideas that work. So there's, one of the things that I try to practice and I'm constantly trying to improve upon is how do you, as the founder, make sure that you have a sort of a 360-degree view of all the people's thoughts on your team and what's going on in the marketplace and understanding what resources you have and then making a decision to go forward. So our team is small, so it's fairly manageable, but we disagree often about what's the right vision for this particular product feature, right?
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully you just work back and forth until at some point you agree, this is what we're doing. You're decisive about it. If it goes wrong, okay, we tried and we come back. That, the definition of a startup is really uncertainty. You are trying to do something that has not been done before. And so therefore, you're always unclear about what's going to happen, but you use the information you have with where you're at and you go forward.
That makes sense. It's interesting you bring up the concept of uncertainty, right? While building a movement that's not only restricted to your community, but sort of more on the global scale, how did you think about, okay, I have this community, let's say the Netherlands, right? And then China and Spain and all these different places, people are getting engaged, but what if that engagement sort of drops off? So what was your thought process behind retaining that global community and making sure that you were engaging them in meaningful ways throughout the different years?
I mean, that's what keeps me up at night is how do we continue to engage with the community? And I don't think you build for your community. I think you build with your community. Mm-hmm. So let me tell you about when a time went wrong. So last year for World Cleanup Day, which was September 21st last year, we were building up to this launch of rolling out a major upgrade on the platform. Not just the app, like we have a whole back-end architecture and data dashboards and things of that nature. And we had been working towards this. And not only were we working closely with commercial partners, and we had told them this is what's happening and this is when to expect it, but we were working, as we always do, with the community. And we totally dropped the ball. We rushed things. Some things took longer than expected. And we really let people down. And that was an incredibly humbling, embarrassing, really tough spot. And, I don't know if there's a quote around this, but like it'll take you decades to build trust and it can be evaporated in a day.
Right.
And that was a moment where we had to say to the community and our partners, we messed up. And we're going to own it fully. And here are the steps we're going to take to fix it. Here are the things we're pretty sure we know how to fix. Here are the things we're not sure we know how to fix. But that's our commitment. And we have slowly worked to earn that trust back. I'm sure there are some people who, probably forgot about us and didn't want to ever come back. And that's our loss. And there are some people we've managed to reestablish that trust with, but that is so critical, especially with community-based projects, that you really are listening first. You're not just building what you think needs to be built.
Right.
You're listening to the community and hearing what's the pain that they have and how do you solve it. Now, here's another area of complexity. As a founder, as an early stage team, you still have to make the decision based on all the information you have. And if the community wants, these 3 features, they don't have necessarily complete visibility into the entire product roadmap. How much resource do you have? Who on the team is out sick? Who on the team has decided to leave? Like that's a balance, right? So at the end of the day, you need to make the decisions, but you hope that you do it in the spirit of your why and what you're trying to build. And you are as transparent as you possibly can be.
That's a beautiful answer. Thank you. And let's sort of try and tie back the whole piece together and, try to pick your brain to say, if you were a 22-year-old or 24-year-old right now trying to build a movement from any part of the world, what's the number one piece of advice maybe you would give to your younger self right now if you're just starting out?
It takes a long time. It just takes a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Don't expect that you are going to solve the world's biggest problems as fast as you think you or as fast as you hope to solve them. I think that, like, if I could be it's hard, right? Founders by nature, entrepreneurs by nature, they want to make a change in the world.
Mm-hmm.
They want to create something that doesn't exist. They want to right a wrong. They want to do something that has never been seen before, right? And that's just difficult. So I think the first piece of advice I would give is, like, go easy on yourself. It's going to take a lot longer than you think it's going to take. The other thing I would say is ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, depending on the type of person you are, like, I think it's a lot more fun to work with people. I don't want to be, slugging away at something by myself in isolation. And you'll get a lot further. And, the smartest people in the world don't work for you, right? So it's like, how do I just open this up to other people who care as deeply as I do about this problem? That's sort of where the magic can happen. It's like when you ask for help, when you put yourself out there, when you're vulnerable about it,
Mm-hmm.
it's amazing who comes knocking. And I think that's one of the most delightful things about starting something new is these doors open where you never would have ever guessed they would have opened. And I think that's what I would share with anybody trying to start something new.
Definitely.
Maybe one last thing I would add. Sorry, one last thing. If you're doing it to make money,
mm-hmm.
I think it's a lot harder. It's harder to get up. Well, let's make it the positive. It's easier to wake up in the morning for a purpose than just
mm-hmm.
a paycheck, right? So, like, if you're getting into this thing because you read some headline about, an 8-digit financial exit that some founder had, from my perspective, you're getting into it for the completely wrong reason. The reason you should get into this is because there's something in the world that really pisses you off. There's something in the world that really upsets you, and you are committed to figuring out how to change it, and knowing that it's going to take time, and it's going to take people, and it's going to take resources, and you're just in it for the long haul. Like, that to me is why you get started.
That makes sense. I think it summarizes pretty much everything we've talked about today. So I wanted to dive straight into the Q&A section, and we have a lot of questions here from our community. Let's get with the first question that's uploaded. How do you build and retain a community engaged in the Litterati movement? I think we answered that part of the question earlier, but then any growth levers that you found to be particularly effective?
So I think that the most effective growth lever is one that you can't control. And it's organic, word of mouth growth. So I guess there's one way you can influence that, which is you have to communicate in a way that is clear, concise, and compelling. So what I mean by that is, if you can get other people talking about whatever it is that you're building, whether it's an app, a new film idea, a new company, if you can describe that in a way that gets people excited, they tend to talk about it. And having other people share what you're building with their friends, their family, their network can drive exponential growth. So that's the lever that you don't necessarily have the ability to pull, but you can influence. I don't think there's anything more valuable than organic word of mouth.
That's perfectly fair. And then the second question we have is, what do you want Litterati to evolve into? So I guess a future state.
So we have 4 basic partner groups and customer segments: schools, NGOs, corporates, and cities. So ideally, we have built a platform that is simple yet sophisticated and can serve each one of them. Because if you think about those 4 groups, they all want the same thing. They want change. And they all want to achieve change through mobilization of people, community, and data. They all want them for slightly different reasons, but hear me out, because you'll see where we think Litterati can go. So schools, great to have kids being trained to be tomorrow's environmental stewards, using today's technology, becoming mobile literate and data centric so that they can create the world that they want. NGOs, the environmental NGOs, they're already out cleaning the planet, looking for ways to create smarter policy and collect data at scale. So how do we create this platform that empowers them.
Mm-hmm.
Corporate. A lot of brands are now making CSR, corporate social responsibility, a very pillar of what they do. The brands whose material often ends up, littering our ocean and our beaches and our streets and our sidewalks, we're able to help them understand where their material is ending up, empowering them to be better stewards of the planet. And in cities is where we see a real opportunity because they feel the pain more than anybody else. Why? Because they pay for it. So becoming this platform that cities use to engage their citizens, to collect data, to help them make more informed decisions, that's where we want this to be. But it comes back to a simple platform that anybody can use. We like to say it's one click and you're done. One click of a photograph, you're done. All of that data is extracted from that photograph, and when collected at scale with others, it can lead to changes in policy and packaging and personal responsibility. Let me tell you what just happened this week because of the community and how that has materialized. So the Dutch community, about 10 months ago, spearheaded by two individuals, a gentleman named Dirk Groot and another named Marijn Tinga. They both have handles, if you will, on Litterati. Dirk is known as the Zwerfinator, which stands for, Zwerfie is Dutch. In Dutch, it's trash selfie. So the Zwerfinator. And then Marijn is the plastic soup surfer. They are unbelievably inspiring individuals. Anyway, they started mobilizing a bunch of people in Holland to pick up these plastic wrappers from a company who makes a cough drop called Antiflu. So it's like a Halls or a Ricola, but it's called Antiflu. And they picked up 50,000 of them. They took the data, went to the company, and showed the CEO. The company is called Pervasco. And the CEO, to his credit, said, wow, I can see the damage that our product is making. I'm committed to changing the supply chain. And we will change all of our packaging from plastic to paper. This week, they did. And if you look on Twitter right now, you will see the excitement within the Dutch Literati community that is now permeating out to the rest of the Literati community based on the fact that they were able to literally change a massive company's supply chain because they were armed with a tool that could provide data. And so when you ask, like, where do I want Literati to be? It's that. It's empowering people around the world, whether you're a city official, a brand steward, a fifth grade teacher, or the leader of an NGO, to create change.
Beautiful. That's really exciting and something that we've probably not heard about and very unique. And we hope that it sort of permeates to a lot of different countries, starting Dutch as an example. Our next question would be, how do you stay motivated after so many years of so many ups and downs? I guess we answered a little bit of this before, but any sort of secret sauce that you have that you wake up in the morning with?
Well, the thing that I wake up in the morning with are my kids.
Kids.
Which is why this whole thing started, right? So when I look at them and think, like, what's the legacy that I can leave? What can I try to teach them? It's that, you know what, you can make a difference. At Literati, we like to say that individually you can make a difference, but together we create an impact.
Right.
And so, if that's the thing that I can show them, what I can instill in them, that's what helps me go day to day when times get really tough. And they do. It can get really, really difficult. Maybe that's one other thing I would share is that if you're going to start something in the social space, pick something big, like really big and really difficult. And here's why. It's the same amount of work as picking something small. So you might think, like, oh, if I just try to do something less ambitious, I'm going to work less or there won't be as many problems.
Right.
It's the same thing. So if you're going to try to create change, why not try to create big change? I would actually argue you'll attract more people and more interest by trying to affect bigger change.
Definitely. The next one is sort of a paragraph. So I'm going to try and read it to the best of my abilities. It says, hi, he's an environmental studies student from California and really enjoyed hearing about your story. During this event, I was thinking about the impact on litter once it is picked up and reaches the landfills. I learned about the Dandora landfill site in Kenya, and it has made me think about the harmful impacts that landfills have on both environment and the local community. In this way, picking up litter kind of seemed like cleaning up one community to pollute another. I was wondering if Litterati is considering any steps to address landfills and the trash cycle more broadly.
Yeah, this is
Good question.
it's a great question. And it brings back just how complex this problem is. So let me frame it in what we call the 5 I's. So our goal is to, yes, eradicate litter, but it's really to build a zero waste world. And that means a fully circular economy. So when we talk about the 5 I's, we believe that the first I is really where we are today. And that's, you have to start with identification. You have to identify the problem. So yeah, we're focused on litter, all the stuff that what we call falls between the cracks, right? Because once you identify the problem, you're effectively diagnosing it. You can start to have forensic type analytics that can inform, which is the second I, what to do next. So you go from identification to information, right? Once you have that raw information, that's where you can get insight, the third I. That leads to influence. Once you have insight, you can influence policy, packaging, personal responsibility. And once you have influence, once change happens on the system, whether it's kids at a school stop buying straws, whether it's a city starts informing and creating a new tax, whether it's a wrapper, it goes from plastic to paper, that change creates inspiration, right? So then people, once they see the change can happen and they're inspired, they come back into the beginning of the funnel and they're there to help identify the problem. When it comes to a landfill, and whoever wrote that in is bringing up a great point, the idea of transferring one problem from one community to another. We believe that unless you start by identifying the problem, you can't even begin to assess what to do with it in a landfill, or ideally divert it from the landfill. And by coming into closer contact with your environment through something like Litterati, it begins to create a level of education and awareness that, oh, this thing is recyclable, or, oh, I don't have to buy single-use plastic wrapped granola bars, or, oh, I can use more reusable items. That first step of identification, we believe over time actually impacts what happens at the larger level with things like landfills. But it's tough. It goes back to, this takes a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Alrighty, so the next question would be, can you talk about the business model of Litterati and how your company gets profits?
Yeah, so we have a subscription service where organizations pay to access the platform that allows them to A, mobilize their individuals, and B, have access to data. So we're actually moving towards an open data initiative where there will be data that is available for anybody to contribute to and consume from. But it's that deeper level of analytics that we're providing to cities, which is really where we're targeted, and tools to help them mobilize their citizens. So they pay to subscribe to the platform to allow them to do that. The application and first levels of data are free for everybody. And how do we get to profitability, I think, was the second part of that. So we believe that, remember when I said that cities feel the pain the most because they pay for it? We see cities as a customer segment that is repeatable because, first of all, every city in the world faces this issue, and every city in the world has really budget in dealing with waste. And so we also believe that if you can build a platform that works in Roanoke, it will work in Rome, or in Manhattan, or in Nairobi. Now, there are differences, obviously, such as translation, such as types of litter, things like scale. And we're testing all these, right? So like as a startup, you got to figure out like, what is your value proposition sufficient? And so far we've been able to onboard quite a few cities. And so we're excited. We think that over, our modeling shows that within about 2.5 years, we can hit profitability. But those are based on assumptions. And now the key is like, can you execute?
Gotcha. Makes sense. Couple of few questions. Second to last one would be, having spoken to many founders, they're never satisfied with success and they always believe that they can do better. When would be a good time where you would just say, yes, Litterati has been successful?
Somebody once told me that my job is to never be satisfied, um, which I think is both true and really unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you actually have to celebrate the small wins along the way, no matter how small. That might be you just raised a round of capital. That might be you just brought on a new hire. That might be your product launched and things went well. It can be a quick update to the app stores. It might be a tweet that you saw from somebody else. For us, it's not about us. It's about the community. It's about seeing stories of these two gentlemen, Mariah and Dirk, and the change that they were able to create. It's about the students in the 5th grade class. It's about the city of San Francisco. For us, we define success based on how others are creating positive change in the system.
Perfect. One of our final questions would be, how do you navigate around questions that you don't have the answers to?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that. So honestly, I think so here's what upsets me is when I see, this happens in politics all the time, right? And that's the obvious one, but it's like, you're watching somebody try to answer a question and they just clearly skip around it. Mm-hmm. And you sit there like, and we know that you didn't answer it. So I hope that I never, ever do that. And where this will happen a lot in the ecosystem of founders, it can often happen with investment conversations, mm-hmm. right? So investors will ask you a certain question, and you'll have absolutely no idea. For me, first of all, I'm a terrible liar. Just ask my wife. So I think it's just about being transparent and being honest. But it's like, okay, look, I don't know the answer to what you're asking. And I recognize that it's an important thing for me to understand and know. So I'm going to go find out that answer. And when I find out that answer, I'm going to come back to you with it. But the key is actually following up. So here's another thing we try really hard to hold as a core value at Litterati. We call it the say-do ratio. Mm-hmm. Did you do what you said you were going to do? Right? Because that comes back to trust. Because if you don't do what you say you're going to do, suddenly that investor, that commercial partner, that teammate, you start to lose, trust begins to erode really fast, as we've discussed earlier. So when a question is asked that I don't know, that's how I answer it. Even more difficult can be when a question is asked that you don't want to answer, but you do know the truth, right? Then I think it's about okay, who's asking? Mm-hmm. And are you willing to answer that question? Do they really need to know that answer? So that can oftentimes be a tricky one to navigate. But for us, it's all about transparency. That's what Litterati is based on. It's about the ground truth. What's on the ground? How do we become transparent about it so we can build solutions? And hopefully, the way we answer our questions, we're super transparent about them as well.
Definitely. I think I have one more question before we can let you go. And that's really interesting because it sort of brings back a point you talked about earlier. There are a lot of things that annoy me in the world. Totally can relate to that. How do I make the decision on which one I should go after first to bring about change?
That's a good one. So one of the problems I have, or one of the challenges I face in life, is I've always seen life as a buffet table. Right. There's a lot of stuff I want to try. I have just as much interest as becoming a guitar maker as I do as building a social impact organization. I'd love to go live on a farm for a long time. I just have this insatiable curiosity for lots of different things. My path through life has not been linear. I was not I'm going to be a doctor and that's all I ever want to be. There might be some people listening that is what they know exactly what they want to do. There might be some who are I have no idea what I want to do, or there's lots of things. I was much more the person who had no idea what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, you just have to decide because you can't do them all. So so back to your last question, I don't have a great answer other than you just have to pick at some point.
Perfect. Awesome. So I think this was really beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all these different insights and sort of showing us your journey from one-man army to a global movement and sort of all the ups and downs you've faced so far. It was an honor having you today, Jeff. It's an absolute privilege. For folks on the call, we are recording this webinar. We'll share it with you in a follow-up email. We'll also post it on social media. And if you have any other questions for Jeff, please do let us know and we'll forward it out to him. Thank you all for being here today. Jeff, any final parting words of wisdom?
I will actually, as you were talking, Raj, I was triggered by maybe something that can answer that last question, which is this. Like, where's a place that you can align your purpose and your profit and your like unique skill? Like, what's the gift that you can offer the world that is unique unto yourself? And can you align that with a problem that you want to solve? That might be a way to pick.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. I'm sure all of our participants are going to have a wonderful time just thinking about this and thinking about the issues they're seeing in their local communities. And hopefully this is going to trigger a lot of people to go out there and take a stance and start making an impact. So again, thank you so much, Jeff. We love talking to you and we hope to see you soon.
Thanks so much, Raj. It was a pleasure being here.
Take care, everyone. Thank you, Jeff.